everyone, this is Emma from Emma Bellish. Today I'm just going to do a quick video about how I cast my asari headpieces. This isn't a tutorial about how to make the mold. I already have the mold, so I'm just going to show you today how I cast the headpieces without getting any air bubbles in the tentacles. Alright, so before we get started, I'm just going to quickly go over the tools that I use. This here is my mold. I've got a can of compressed air that I'm just going to use to clean all the dust and stuff out of the mold because I haven't used it for a while. The latex that I'm going to be using is Monster Maker's RD407 mask making latex. In addition to the latex, I also need a couple of chip brushes, just some disposable brushes. I need a small disposable paintbrush, and I also use a syringe. Alright, so the first thing that I'm going to do is just clean out the mold with the compressed air. And that just gets any extra gunk out of there. One thing that I did forget to show you guys is I also use a little spritz bottle full of water, and I just use that to moisten the mold ahead of time before I start casting. Okay, so I've got my mold propped up right now. And the first thing that I'm going to do is spritz the whole thing down and just moisten the mold. I don't want to get it soaking wet, but a little bit damp. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that little paintbrush that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to cut it off about there so that's nice and short. So I've got a nice little short paintbrush that can get into the tentacles. Alright, so I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to, oh yeah, there we go, give my latex a good stir. Use the syringe, just pull up some latex. And then I use that to inject latex down to the very tips of the tentacles. And once I've done that, I'll go in with this little tiny paintbrush and just brush the latex down just to work any air bubbles that got stuck down there, work those out. And just make sure latex gets into the very, very tip. And I'll go to the next one. The smaller tentacles typically only take one syringe full of latex, but the longer ones at the top will usually take 2 or 3. You just want to fill them all the way up. The other thing is I don't just put the syringe into the tentacle and then pump latex in. I actually stick it up against the wall and then let the latex ooze down the wall down to the very bottom of the tentacle. And that's just an effort to avoid more air bubbles. Alright, so now I'm going to take one of these chip brushes. I like to tug any loose bristles out, because getting those stuck in your latex is kind of a pain in the butt. And then just start brushing a thin coat of latex all over the mold. And this is to make sure that you don't get any air bubbles in the very bottom layer. Now you want to make sure that you don't go too thick around the edge of the prosthetic, because you don't want the blending seam to become too thick. Otherwise you're going to have a really hard time blending it into your skin. But you don't want to go too thin, otherwise it's going to tear when you're demolding. And what I have found, and this may not work for everyone, but it's worked for me, is I will brush the latex on in one direction. So right now I'm kind of doing them all vertically, the brush strokes, along the forehead. And once it's dried a little bit, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do a bunch of brush marks horizontally, like the opposite direction. And I find that tends to strengthen the latex a little bit around the forehead, so that it doesn't tear when you're demolding. Okay, now I'm going to go in and do what I mentioned before and do those brush strokes the other direction. And I just find that tends to make it so that it's not going to tear when I'm demolding it, and hopefully when you're taking it off as well. Alright, I think I'm good. So the next step is to take your bucket of latex, and I'm going to pour it all into the mold. And I'm actually running a little bit low on latex. Normally you'd want to kind of fill this up as much as you can. But we'll see what we can do with this. And don't get any on the edges, like these front edges, because it's going to be a pain in the butt to get those thin again. This is not all going to stay in there. This is, I'm going to pour most of this back out again, but what I'm going to do right now is just kind of rotate the mold and move it around and slush this latex around so that it gets a nice thick coat on other areas. And again, I'm going to avoid the kind of front pieces. So I'm going to actually have to move this off camera real quick. Maybe I can. Let's see. Keep in mind that this is also like a 20 or 30 pound mold right here, so I get all my exercise in, slush casting. And I kind of try and get as much as I can, and then I'm going to go in with the brush afterwards and just move some of that up as well. Okay, so I'm going to take the brush, bring a bunch of this up. I'm just feathering out the latex. Up here along the edges again. Alright, so we're going to let that sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. Should be good. Take these. And then we'll come back and dump out the extra latex. Alright, so it's been about 20 or 30 minutes, and what I'm going to do is just dump this back out into the bucket. It's probably worth noting now that you don't want to be wearing clothes that you care about when you're doing this, because latex will ruin anything that you're wearing. So make sure that you wear crappy clothes and that you don't care about them, because I almost always manage to get latex all over myself when I'm making these headpieces. I usually just pour it out the back of the neck. So I've had this sitting out for a few minutes and it's kind of done dripping all the excess out. So I'm going to pull this off here. I'm going to put this back and see if we can get you a good view of what it looks like now. So that's the inside now. So what loading up all that latex has done is it's created like this, what they call a gel coat of latex. And basically the way stone molds work is you pour a bunch of latex in, it sucks out the moisture of the latex that's touching the stone, and will create this thick gel, and then when you pour the latex back out, that gel stays stuck to the mold. And as the latex dries, the mold is going to keep pulling moisture out until the latex is completely cured. So typically now what I will do is I will take a pin and I'll just go through and pop any little air bubbles that happen to show up. So I'm just going to take a little sewing pin here and just pop anything that will cause problems when it's curing. And I think what I'm going to do is actually just tilt this up some more. Right now it's sitting so that all the latex is going to pool into the tentacles, and I'd actually like those to empty out a little bit so that they cure faster. So I am actually going to flip this mold around and I'm going to prop it up against the wall so that the latex will come out of the tentacles and pool a little bit more in the top of the head where there's some good airflow. Let's see if I can move this camera. There we go. So there's some good airflow and it will dry nice and even. And now I'm actually going to let this sit in the mold for at least 2 days. I will often actually let it sit for about a week just to make sure that the tentacles are nice and dry before I demold it. I've had it happen before. The first time that I cast a headpiece where the tentacles didn't dry enough, I'd let it sit for about 24 hours and they weren't dry when I pulled it out of the mold. And so, and basically the headpiece was ruined and I had to cast a new one. Because there's no airflow up in the tentacles and latex is air dry, it can take a lot longer for an asari headpiece to dry compared to a regular mask cast. Like my treasure goblin doesn't have any really deep undercuts like the asari headpiece does, and so my treasure goblin mask can be cured with, or dried, sorry, not cured, dried within 12 to 24 hours and be completely fine, whereas this definitely needs the extra drying time. What I'm also going to do is set up a fan so that that's blowing just directly into here, and that's going to speed up the drying time as well. You're going to know when it is dry when the latex starts actually pulling away from the mold on its own. Especially like right down in here, it's just going to lift away from the mold and not even be touching it by the time I'm ready to demold this. And that is how I cast my asari headpiece. Let me know in the comments if you'd like me to do another video of me demolding this once it's finished drying. If you'd like to see more like this, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions, let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. And thank you so much for watching.